Hi, I am Igor Smirnov, International Grandmaster and a chess coach, and it's my pleasure to welcome you into this new video lesson. Today we have a very interesting topic, the secrets of strong players. Obviously, strong players have something that makes them stronger, that helps them to gain victories. And you may have noticed that they are not willing to share these insider secrets with other players. There are a lot of video lessons out there recorded by strong grandmasters, but in most cases they just show you some opening moves or some strong moves played in the games of top grandmasters. However, they do not reveal the most important thing: how can they find such strong moves and how can you do the same? And this is exactly what we will be discussing today. Well, of course, I cannot tell you everything within just one lesson, but nevertheless, I'll give you a few powerful practical recommendations that you'll be able to implement and improve your results right after watching this lesson. Before we begin, let me make one last note. During a game of chess, you demonstrate your way of thinking. Strong players know the most powerful techniques for finding strong moves. How can they do it? This is what we will discuss during this lesson. In order to illustrate this difference between the way of thinking of strong players and not that strong, let's have a look at one example. In this position, white played rook takes d6, winning a pawn, and black answered queen e5. And perhaps he wanted to block white's e-pawn, and of course at the same time black is attacking white's queen and keeping an eye on white's d6 rook. Now I have a question for you. How would you play here as white? You may pause the video and think about it. I'm pretty sure that most players would just take black's queen on e5. Generally, when you have a material advantage, it's good to exchange pieces. However, in this position it's not the best move. If you have learned my previous lessons, then you already know that to take is a mistake. If white takes black's queen on e5, white helps black to activate his knight and to bring it on a good central square. That's why in such positions it's better to keep the tension and to let your opponent release the tension. And white played king h2. Now you can see this idea clearly. If white takes black's queen on e5, black will activate his knight and will put it on a good central square. And the opposite situation is applicable for black. If black takes white's queen on g3, then it will help white to activate his king and to bring it closer to center. That's why to take is a mistake, and that's why in such cases it's better to keep the tension. In the game, black indeed took white's queen, white recaptured, and now white has an easily winning position. White can bring the king to f4, then push e5, and he has an extra pawn, and black has a lot of weaknesses, so it's totally winning for white. Here we have seen one secret of strong players. A rule to take is a mistake. It may sound simple, but most players do not follow this rule and do not know about it. Actually, they do an opposite thing. They take whenever they can. Actually, it's easy to explain it. Let's have a look at another example. Let's imagine that you are playing black and you're considering the move d5. Which variations do you need to check before you can play this move? Obviously, you need to make sure that you don't lose something. And so you start your calculation, and you think to yourself, okay, I'll play d5, he'll take, I'll take with the knight, he recaptures, I take with the bishop, he takes with the bishop, I take with the queen, and now you see that everything is fine, and it means that you may play d5. This is a usual way of calculating variations, and after some practice this becomes your habit. That's why most chess players follow this way of thinking automatically. If they can take something, they start their calculations right from this move. However, strong players have their secrets, and they know that to take is a mistake. Let me make one last note. Of course, they don't say that you should never take. Sometimes you can win opponent's material, or you may be forced to recapture in order to keep the material in balance. In those cases, of course, you will take. For instance, let's make a few moves back in this game. For example, after white took c takes d5, of course black has to recapture, otherwise he will just lose material, so there is nothing to think about. Black has no other options but to take. But in this position, white should not take on d5. This would be a mistake, and white should refrain from making this move, because of the rule to take is a mistake. Actually, I have recorded a separate lesson about this rule, and maybe you even have seen it already. If not, you may find a link below this video lesson, and I think it will be useful for you. And in any case, I believe it will be useful to repeat this material. Okay, now we can move on to the next rule, and let's have a look at the next example. This is a theoretical position of Sicilian defense, neither variation. Let's make a few moves forward. Black played b4, attacking the knight. White retreated. Black played queen c7, h4, preparing attack on the king side, and black answered d5, attacking white's center and the e4 pawn more specifically. Okay, and here I'd like to ask you this question. How would you play here as white? As usual, you may pause the video and think about it by yourself for a couple of minutes. I'm very glad if you haven't decided just to take the d5 pawn, because as you already know, to take is a mistake, and in this position this is indeed not the best option. After that, black would recapture with the knight, bringing his piece into center, attacking white's bishop e3 and gaining more activity. So white needs to find something better. As we know, we should try to keep the tension and avoid such moves like e takes d5. However, it's not that easy to find a suitable way to keep the tension and to protect the e4 pawn somehow. White can't play knight g3 because this square is under the control of black's queen. If white plays something like bishop g2, this would place the bishop on a very passive position, and after an exchange, the g4 pawn will be hanging, and black can move his knight to c4, so it doesn't look like a very good option for white. And lastly, if white tries move queen d3, it's quite an awkward idea. Black can play knight e5 or knight c5, gaining extra tempos, and it's definitely not what white wants. After all, you may be thinking that if you don't have a good way to defend the pawn on e4, then perhaps you just have to take on d5. This is how most chess players think in such situations. However, it has one major drawback. Everything that we've been thinking about so far in this position was focused on opponent's threats, and we completely forgot about our own plans. Let me bring up an analogy. It's like the tug-of-war competition. Each party is trying to pull the rope into his direction, and the one who does it stronger will win the competition. Similar thing happens in chess. Each player is trying to pull the game into the direction that he wants, and the one who does it more insistently will win the game. Now let's implement this new approach for this position. We need to shift our focus from black's threats to white's plans. Okay, what is the white's plan here? Obviously, white wants to push g5. That's why he played h4 and g4 during the previous moves. White can't push g5 straight away, because after h takes, white cannot recapture, the pawn is pinned. Therefore, white needs to prepare this move somehow, and he just needs to think how to solve this problem of the hanging rook on h1. We can find a couple of ideas for this purpose. For example, we can play bishop h3, covering the line. Then after d takes, white will push g5 successfully. And bishop h3 also takes aim at black's e6 pawn. Maybe white will sacrifice a piece there, or white can push g6 and undermine this e6 pawn. All in all, this position looks very promising for white, so this is one interesting idea. Let's go back. At the very least, white can just remove the rook, play rook g1, with the similar ideas of pushing g5 and then g6 and developing attack on the king side. That's another alternative. In the actual game, white finds another move with a similar idea. He played bishop f4, attacking black's queen, and after e5, bishop h2. White covered h-line with his dark squared bishop, and he's still ready to push g5. Of course, black can't take the knight because pawn is pinned, and that's why black took d takes e4 and white pushed g5. Now white is developing his attack, and this is of course a very complicated position, but white has pretty good chances to develop attack successfully. Black should be really careful. For example, this position, if black makes a natural move knight d5, and he's losing immediately, white can take bishop takes e5 with a discovered attack on black's h8 rook. Okay, let's make a few moves back and observe that critical position once again. After we adopted a new approach, we were able to find a lot of interesting and powerful possibilities for white. You may notice a big difference in the way of thinking of strong players and weak players. Being attacked, weak players think how to defend. Unlike them, strong players try to pull the game in the direction that they want, and they always try to keep focusing on their own plans. We can summarize these ideas by stating the rule, offense is the best defense. Well, I'm sure you've heard this saying many times in the past. However, without a real understanding of this idea, this rule is rather useless. Here I'm not talking about an active defense or a counterattack or anything like that. Here I'm talking about another approach for the game. It means that you should always try to push your own plan and try to lead the game into the direction that you want. It's not about counter blows or some kind of tactical tricks. It rather relates to your deep understanding of the chess game and adopting the proper approach. Okay, we have learned two powerful secrets of strong players. The first one, to take is a mistake. When there is a possibility for exchange, weak players just use it, they simply take. Unlike them, strong players know that to take is a mistake and you should keep the tension. Being attacked, weak players think about defense. Strong players, on the contrary, follow the rule offense is the best defense. It may sound simple, but this is a very powerful technique. And most players do not follow it. Actually, it's easy to explain it. Let's have a look at our example once again. Let's say you're playing white and opponent just played b4. You know that you need to move your knight somewhere, and such situations happen very often, and that's why we have this stereotype in our head. If opponent attacked you, you need to defend. However, as you know, it's not exactly correct, and very often you have something more powerful. And at least you can try to find something more powerful. Even in this position, white has an option knight c6, with a double attack of black's queen and pawn making a counterblow. Although it does not work in this particular situation, in another position it could work. And it means that you definitely should not make defensive moves automatically.